All right. Well, we're here with our fancy new setup. Fancy new setup on the internet.
Is it?
Hopefully, yep, let's go. Hopefully, uh, this mic that we got picks up a little bit more. Leave us a comment if it sounds better on the internet or not. And if it still sounds like crap, leave us a comment that of something that we could get to make it sound better. That would be good.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Get some suggestions from people.
Yeah.
I have watched some of the videos we've made, and I am always disappointed that I cannot hear myself
Sure.
when I drop my voice, and I anticipate what I'm going to say. I know what I still have
Right.
an imprint of the memory. Anyway, why don't we just go right into
Sure.
doing substance?
So I just picked up Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life and an Antidote to Chaos. And I was just reading the foreword last night just to crack the book. And I stumbled across a really interesting part that I wanted to read aloud, and my uncle wanted to elaborate on this point. So I'm going to read it aloud, and hopefully you can hear it, and hopefully I don't trip over my words very much. So I'll start here, and let's see where it goes.
Start where you began when you read it to me.
Okay. Maps of Meaning was sparked by Jordan's agonized awareness as a teenager growing up in the midst of the Cold War that much of mankind seemed to be on the verge of blowing up the planet to defend their various identities. He felt he had to understand how it could be that people would sacrifice everything for a quote-unquote identity, whatever that was. And he felt he had to understand the ideologies that drove totalitarian regimes to a variant of the same behavior, killing their own citizens. In Maps of Meaning, and again in this book, one of the matters he cautions readers to be most wary of is ideology, no matter who is peddling it or to what end. Ideologies are simple ideas disguised as science or philosophy that purport to explain the complexity of the world and offer remedies that will perfect it. Ideologues are people who pretend they know how to make, quote-unquote, the world a better place before they've taken care of their own chaos within. The warrior identity that their ideology gives them covers over that chaos. That's hubris, of course, and one of the most important themes of this book is, quote, set your own house in order first. And Jordan provides practical advice on how to do this. Ideologies are substitutes for true knowledge, and ideologues are always dangerous when they come to power because simple-minded, I-know-it-all approach is no match for the complexity of existence. Furthermore, when their social contraptions fail to fly, ideologues blame not themselves, but all who see through their simplifications. Another great U of T professor, Louis Fewer, in his book Ideology and the Ideologists, observed that ideologies retool the various religious stories that purport to have supplanted but eliminate the narrative and psychological richness. Communism borrowed from the story of the children of Israel in Egypt, with an enslaved class, rich persecutors, a leader like Lenin, who goes abroad, lives among the enslavers, and then leads the enslaved to the promised land, the utopia, the dictatorship of the
Proletariat.
A word that I have never heard before.
Oh, too bad. 1984.
Yeah.
Brave New World. Anyway, I would like to address some of that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
First of all, I applaud Dr. Peterson's essential reduction of that whole mess to the defending of the self identity. So he goes to the heart of the matter. I would like to deconstruct the idea of the self in this conversation because it's been done long ago, long before I ever was born. The Buddhists deconstructed the self, and of course all psychologists today and all philosophers of any repute will deconstruct the self, meaning they will take it apart and show it to have nothing at its core. Except for one thing, there's that consciousness factor that has always been a bugaboo for the people who like the materialists who claim that matter is everything and there is nothing but matter, and that consciousness is just some kind of a, they would use a term like epiphenomenon of matter, like some kind of vapor that rises out of something that exists, but it's not separate from, and it's reducible to, and it's still kind of a mystery. They can't really do anything to explain it because it's extraordinary, because the basis of their thought is that all matter is unconscious. There's no life there, and that these events that we call human lives are just incorrect versions of material existence. But I need not to go into their argument so much at this point. But I do applaud Peterson's premise that the problem with the ideologues is that they're defending a sense of self, its identity, and he's absolutely right. And let's take a look at that need. Let's look at it from an existential point of view. The need of the self is varied, but it's fundamentally standing on one basic abyss, and that is the death of the self. It is profoundly vulnerable. It realizes at its depth that essentially it's lack, because it's always on fire with desire, as the Buddha pointed out 2,500 years ago when he did the fire sermon. We are on fire with desire. Lack, said Sakra. We are lack because we are made of l'nayant, the nothingness. Consciousness, like everything it sees, has no substance. It flits from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another, and that's because it is not made of anything. And yet it is so strange. Anyway, but it's always separate from all the things that it perceives. So it lives in this constant state of, I like to call it alienation. It's the foundation of alienation, which is basically separation. So it's in a condition of separation from everything and essentially from itself, because after a while, the self is treated as a thing, especially in the life of the ideologue. You're nothing but a soldier in the great war for the proletariat against the masters. And there are masters, no doubt that Marx was right in what he did when he did the Das Kapital and critiqued capitalism. He was not wrong in his solution. That's the problem. Because you see what's wrong in the other doesn't mean that your position is going to be better, because the self is involved in everything. And thus, when this set of selves takes control, a set of selves based upon that knee-jerk reaction that he talked about, the ideologue's knee-jerk reaction, you are wrong, therefore I am right. When this self takes control and sets up the ideologue that becomes the security blanket that you spread over all your behaviors. I do this for the sake of the republic. I do this for the sake of the state. I do this for the sake of the people. But you're murdering millions of people doing it. As we know, Stalin and Mao Zedong and Pol Pot, etc. Wherever you find anybody in control of anything, I don't care what idealized society they believe in, it's always going to be excessive. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. All great men are evil. And so evil things are done in the name of a greater good. So that's a very appealing philosophy called utilitarianism. But Kant, whose categorical imperative could be lived only by angels, beings with wings, will say, you never do that. You never do that because you're setting a precedent for universal law. They don't mind. The ideologues don't mind because they're not really at a moral level. They're at a power level. The whole thing is driven by a sense of power, which is the opium, a new opium for the people. Lenin called religion opium. Well, the new opium is the power of the people for the proletariat. We're all going to share, we're all going to be happy, we're all going to live in a utopia. And I know I sound like I'm ranting because I'm angry with this too. I've seen the crap behind it long, long, long ago when I was not nearly so informed as Dr. Peterson. I always realized that one side or another is going to have the power and therefore is going to do anything to justify itself. And it will kill people to justify itself. And so I like to look at why the self is so insecure. And the answers have been with us for a long time. The Buddhists, 2,500 years ago, deconstructed the self. They said it's insubstantial. It doesn't get reincarnated. It doesn't get saved. It doesn't get liberated because it does not exist. What is it then? The psychologists of today would tell you what it is. It's made of memories that you attach to certain events that you observed in life. The only constant in that is that during those events, you had a sense of self. You had a sense of being this embodied being separate from everything around you. You were in a fundamental condition of, I'd love to say observation, but you were participating in it, and you were participating as if you are a separate entity. And you can't deny that. Even this little dog has that sense, doesn't it? This little dog is full of fear. And if you put a chihuahua at your feet and you fiddle around with things, that dog will know if you're going to possibly drop something on it. That dog is afraid for itself, right? What is the self? It's its bodily self, the sensate self. So I reduce self to the sensate level, the sensible level, the kinesthetic level, the sentient level. It's a sentient being. Why? Because I reduce it to the state of the body. Why? Because the body to me is not a lump that is perceived, contrary to the narcissism of our time. You are not what you are in the eyes of other people. Fundamentally, you are a field of awareness. The body is a sentient being, and you feel in that sentience at all levels. If your digestion is not good, you're going to feel emotionally poor.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So you are essentially a consciousness. And that still is unexplained by the scientists who want to reduce everything to function of the brain. Now, Rupert Sheldrake, whom I've been listening to, talks about various things, and I'm sure that at some point, I didn't hear him say it today because I had to cut short, but at some point he will dismiss the idea that memories are located and stored and trapped, never to exit the brain, the
right.
individualized brain. But I think at some point he will make a case for all of conscious knowledge being somehow located in the subatomic matrix.
Amazing.
And therefore the brain, I'm pretty sure he will say this at some point, the brain is not so much a creator, it's a receiver.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very
amazing.
It's a really revolutionary idea. So that the brains of the geniuses like Einstein or Carl Sagan or people like that,
just really good receivers.
They're great receivers, right?
Right. And even maybe enlightened beings that have come to exist.
I think that the key to that, in response to what you just said, the reason that enlightened beings would be so open to knowledge, great knowledge, is because there's a letting be in enlightened beings. I mean, Alan Watts would tell you this. The whole point of liberation is to fully let go. He probably has done a talk on that very point. And certainly in his books, that's one of the essential points. When you learn to let go and let be, miraculous things happen. And so if a person is at a level of meditative level, a la Krishnamurti, a la the Maharaj, Nisargadatta Maharaj, the people who advocate a purified Zen where you watch all the time, you always stay awake, not some introverted, psychotic. No, in the world, in relationship, you observe out there and in here at the same time. The Moody Blues, you have to make the journey out and in. So interesting, the popular music, even some of that was known.
Right.
So in order to do that, you've got to be a disciplined person to some subtle extent, to pay attention to the self. And then after a while, maybe if you pay attention to the self long enough, you realize something about the self. It's full of crap. It's always defending itself. It idealizes itself. A guy drove into me on the highway one time. I was in the right lane doing the speed limit. He drove into me from behind. We got out of the car and he blamed me. The next night he called me up and apologized, said he was never watching me. He hadn't looked at me. He was looking at the cop on the other side of the barrier. And so, but the first reaction is to say, I'm right and you're wrong. And there you are, ideologue. Only their sense of righteousness is not an overnight thing. It's ongoing. And there's never a questioning because it's a comfort. I belong to this group. And unfortunately, we see that now in our country. There's such division.
Right.
And the so-called liberals are saying, I am better than you, therefore I will kill you. You're violent and ugly, and heartless, I will kill you. I mean, the justifications are historical, as we know. Good people who dedicate themselves, because they're authoritarian personalities, therefore followers, they will do anything for what the overlords tell them. They will do anything in the name of the state. And thus you need good rhetoricians to convince them. Guys out there who are as corrupt as can be, but who speak with golden tongues to the people.
So, really quickly to kind of summarize and also go on to another point at the same time. Many of the issues that we see with people trying to overpower others and take control of massive groups of people without taking responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, they do relinquish responsibility.
They're not going inward. They're projecting outward. And essentially that is the problem. It seems that everything is external and not internal. It is a lack of relation to even oneself, like from a center of self to the outward world, and instead it is more of a projection onto the outward world as an ideology. And so therefore, even if it would be incredibly frightening to a person that is that removed from themselves, they should probably go about the business of journeying more inward to discover their own horseshit.
Yeah, I agree that there will be some people who do it. I think that this world is like a filter system. I mean, I have a version of this world that is not entirely original with me, but I get the sense it could be the dumping ground of this area of the universe. And we go through this very low level place in order to rise, perhaps. That's a romantic version that carries reincarnation with it. You think of Ouspensky's and Gurdjieff's system where, this is a world, a realm where 48 major laws dominate our lives. It could be economic, it could be gravity, it could be a whole number of different things, psychological laws, neurophysiological laws. Things like that. I've never seen the whole list of them. And then if you're really a bad person and you don't really succeed in elevating, you don't even keep track of this miserable place. You wind up in the worst place of all, which they call the moon, where you go to the moon where there are 96 laws. So it's very difficult to climb out of the muck and to go back to the source, which some people call God or liberation or moksha or transcendental ecstasy or whatever. But to go back there is extremely difficult.
So in other words, the laws would represent attachments, things that are interrupting the flow of existence.
I guess you could call it that, but that's for me, that's too general. These are laws that you're like this physical being, captured by all the physical needs and desires and all that. And this level is the muck. You're like a mud baby swimming in mud. You're like a thing made out of mud, but the mud is aware of itself to some fundamental extent. Now to rise up above the mud, well, very difficult. Uh, Terence McKenna would say psychedelics was a great revolution, and he and Ram Dass basically agreed on that. Only McKenna was still advocating the use of psychedelics, while Ram Dass had gone beyond that. He had not done that for a long time. But he said basically you have experiences that are at higher levels. So somebody taking a certain drug would not be in the realm of 48 laws, would be in the realm of 24, maybe even 12.
Right.
And you could only imagine what life would be at a 12, where things would be so much easier than here, and therefore easier to have the value system of higher states of consciousness. Although I imagine you get stuck anywhere.
Right, right.
See, there are all attachments. I mean, 12 might be wonderful. If you or I went to 12 now, I bet we wouldn't want to leave for a while.
Right. It might be like heroin.
Exactly. I would think heroin would be, because people, I don't know if people understand about heroin. I have never had any experience with it except that I've had morphine. I hated it personally. Why did I hate it? Because it makes you completely dead to your body.
This was during your hip surgery?
My hip surgeries, my many hip surgeries, and the broken leg. And it's terrible. I mean, you feel sick. I felt sick. I never liked it. And you have no strength. And what people want to do is reduce the sense of suffering that the body carries in itself, so that there's no more anything. There are no more itches. The itches come later with the heroin addicts. But there's no feeling.
Right.
There's no pain.
Less sensate.
Less sensate.
And that's actually the opposite of what you're promoting for the body consciousness work, right? It's like go into the sense.
For a long time I've held the potential that if a person were in great pain, it would be possible to penetrate to the core of that, to just find that level of existence that is ontologically prior to pain, not chronologically prior, but at some fundamental there is just an emptiness. I think heroin does that for people. I think when people take heroin, they probably experience something like that. They're conscious, but there's no pain. So they're closer to the center. Unfortunately, they pay for it.
Right.
Just as you pay for it later on when they take you off the opiates, and you find that your endorphin system is lower than it used to be. And now you experience pain at a much greater depth. Thus, that's exactly what happens during a heroin addiction, where the body is not manufacturing its endorphin, and depends completely on the endorphin that's raised by the heroin. All those neurotransmitters firing and finding no keyholes, then the pain is horrible.
Right.
That's why a lot of people will die during heroin withdrawal if they don't have some kind of help, or some substance or something like that.
Right.
Cold turkey used to kill people.
Right.
And it would take days of going through hell. It would be going to hell, I imagine.
Right. Coming down from it.
Yeah. Okay. She must hear somebody outside.
Defending the house.
Come on, should we stop that?
No, hold on one second.
Come on, Luce. Come on, my good girl. Oh my God, what a dog. Come on, baby.
So, ideologies
I love this girl.
and ideologues seem to be nothing but projections.
That's good.
Projections, separate.
Separative.
There's no way that any one circumstance could cover all of existence. There's no way. And so it is essentially important for everyone to take responsibility for themselves in some of the most basic ways. You agree with this?
I agree, and Dr. Peterson probably appeals to many people who are looking to improve their lives, and I think he gives them excellent guidance, and it's practical guidance. I'm floating. We both know that. I'm up in the clouds, and I disappear every once in a while. But I like to go to the roots of things because that's where I have found my way.
And it's still within. It's within reason. I think. I mean, all of it is still. I think that is also, for some people, existentialism and doing that sort of work can clear people of many of the bullshit attachments.
Why not? Why not?
Sometimes, maybe not always, because I think some people get hung up on, well, what do I do now?
Well, some people get hung up on the negative side of the existential investigation. First things first. Existentialism is not a choice you make. It's what you are. You're an existential being. You find existentialism in St. Thomas Aquinas. You find this. And when I gave a lecture on existentialism at the community college, I was submarined by the residing Baptist professor and his two minions, one of whom said existentialism should not even be allowed to be taught in the colleges. Oh my God, burn the books. Well, I mean, a Hitlerian attitude, if you've ever heard it, because they're authoritarian personalities kissing the ass of their big surrogate daddy.
What was the reason? Why did they say?
Because they think it's anti-Christian. They think it's because it's man alone. There's a book by that name. I used it in class. Because it's in many cases meaningless. Life is meaningless. No, it's not meaningless. It's God. It's God's life. You live God to be a good person, then you're going to go to a heaven. This is like a training ground. And the existentialist, I don't know about God. All I know is my own existence. I'm living here. All these things have been taught to me, but there's no evidence for anything. God, I don't even understand the meaning. Is it a big father? There can't be a big father. Look at all the horror that he allows. And there you find that in Dostoevsky, where which one of the brothers said to God, you don't exist. You don't deserve to exist. Okay, you don't deserve. And one of my characters in one of my books said, God in World War II. He said, God wasn't in the war. He was back here in a ladies' flower club, maybe, but God wasn't in the war. This is after he accidentally machine gunned 300 American prisoners of war, while he thought he was doing God's warrior work.
Right. Again,
the existential confrontation. How many people came out of Providence College with me who turned their back completely on the religion of Christianity? How many guys came out of there? I can't tell you how many guys. We were so fed up with theology and moral lectures and stuff like that, things they couldn't live up to. They simply gave up on the whole thing. They threw the baby out with the bathwater because they threw out the ridiculous dogma and authoritarian demands made by dogmatic, authoritarian, right-wing type priests. They threw out the religion. They threw away all of Christianity without understanding any of it. It just, to them, was foolish. And for many, many people, I've had them in my classroom, from every level, from junior high school all the way to graduate school. Religion is nothing more than an extension of the cult of the personality, which is the result of the authoritarian personality. And thus, when you have ideologues and an ideology, it is so much better to attach a person to it. And thus, in 1984, you have the picture of the leaders. You have Big Brother, even though he's not a real being. You understand. I'm just probably preaching to the choir. Anybody who's listening to this probably knows all this.
Some of it. But that's the whole thing, right? You take that path down to a new concept and connect ideas that might not ever have been connected.
Yeah, that's where it used to be fun to teach, because I had some very good students in my life, and they really, not everybody in the classroom, but some of them really had a dialogue with me, because that's what philosophy is.
Mm.
Some people think, oh, philosophy, I go crack open the top of my head, he pours in stuff and he closes my head up. Philosophy is a dialogue, it's a questioning.
Right.
It's fundamentally a questioning of fundamental things, and asking the most direct and simple questions is probably the best thing to do all the time.
Well, let me explain how I can butcher and yet connect the two ideas of what I do with what I've learned from listening to you for so long.
Ranting.
I think that training goes about the same way, if you can view it in that way, as a body consciousness type work, instead of a task list of things that you must do in order to achieve greatness and championship. You can instead have sort of a questioning dialogue with your existence on a physical level, and you can go into that extremely deeply, like somebody would do in yoga. That doesn't mean you have to get caught up in, same thing, ideologies of whatever the hell other achievements that somebody has listed off. However, if you're really doing good work with training, you can completely feel your physical existence and align with that in so many different ways. I'd go on for hours explaining the different things that I've learned through training.
It should be an enlivening, true? It should be enlivening. Unfortunately, a lot of what passes for physical exercise dedicated to health, I think, does not do that. I mean, we don't need to go to the boxers who are better if they are impervious to pain.
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and that's a question that I continue to ask myself to this day, and I probably will for the next however many years I continue to do this. But I'm in the process of questioning how much is beneficial in terms of training, how much pushing is beneficial versus detrimental. I have no answer for that. I observe it on a daily basis, on a moment to moment basis, and I try to figure it out as best as I can. But it's a deep rabbit hole for me to look at.
Yeah, you've been involved in the young man's quest for a long time. You were brought up in such a way as you needed to correct the direction of your life.
Yeah.
You were not given the proper nutrition, and you were given tons of sugars and stuff like that in various forms. And so you changed that around, and obviously anything you do is going to very often lead to kind of an excess. You lean too much this way or too much that way.
Of course.
But now you're beginning to balance back, because you're getting to be an old dog.
Right.
You're 33 years old, and that's no joke. If you were a baseball player, you'd have maybe one more 3-year contract if you're good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, not many sports in at my age and above.
No, really. So, I mean, what you do requires a tremendous amount of energy, more than even the baseball player for the most part, although they can do things that other people can't do.
That's an extreme skill.
That's an extreme skill.
What I was going to say connects what we started this conversation with, which is that there's a lot of ideologies in training.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh.
There's a lot of ideologues in training that believe that they know what's best. And I will tell you that even with the amount of studying that I have done, I still don't know what's best, because I don't think that there's any one circumstance that can fit the bill, which is, it makes it really tough to fit within a system, in any training system. It's always looking around the corner to see. There are some issues with every system that I've ever come across, which is something that you've mentioned in other circumstances too, that any system is corruptible. And it's because it's the nature of the human body, which is always, it's an adaptive mechanism, on top of, many other things, of course, but an emotional being one of those things. But there's no way that one form of exercise can fit the bill for everything that the human body is capable of doing. And it's really interesting to experience, certainly.
You are a kind of a guru to your I want to call them victims all the time, to your clients.
Yeah, victims.
Well, before we end this, just as we end this, I want to ask you a rhetorical question, which you need not answer. Whenever you're ready to end this, you let me know so I can ask you the question. You want to do it now?
Right.
Well, look, you're going to go through a lot. You probably changed things for your clients already. And here's what I would suggest to you, and it's in the form of a question. Do you think that it would be okay to make the very last thing that you eliminate the fact that you hit them with a stick?
Leave us questions, comments, anything below. Hopefully, as we do more and more of these videos, that we get more feedback, both positive and negative feedback, so we know what we can improve upon. And
how to use the microphone? So
how do we do
what we
technology things? I don't really know. Hopefully, we get somebody on board that wants to do video editing. Maybe we'll do that next.
Yes, that would be nice.